to it, the relative loneliness. We don't have as many people around. We're not in relationship with others. The 1960s, what happened? Are we right to see it as a sort of a fulcrum point when the West really started to lose its way?
So first, John, I'd like to say that about identity politics, in a nutshell, I think that these people who believe they are victims are indeed victims. I think there is truth there, but they are not the victims of what they've been taught to believe. They are not the victims of the traditional family, for example, with its heteronormativity. Exactly the opposite is true. They are victims of loneliness and disconnection and of having been deprived of things that many generations before us took for granted, all generations, in fact, that grounded people. For example, living in a large, robust family with all of its problems and neuroses, et cetera, gave people connections they could trust. Living in a large family gives people knowledge of the opposite sex before they get launched into the world. They learn an understanding of the differences between boys and girls, men and women, et cetera. And they also acquire, in virtue of a large family, a lot of people who can help them in life, who can teach them things, who can teach them how to throw a football or how to make a connection to a job opportunity, for example. We have to understand that since the 1960s, the sexual revolution has wrecked all of that for a lot of people. So let's go to what happened in the early 1960s. The promise was that the sexual revolution would liberate men and women, right? And especially women. The promise was that artificial contraception adopted en masse would strengthen marriages by giving people control over their fertility. All of this probably seemed like common sense at the time. A lot of people believed in it. And yet, over the decades, we saw quite the opposite happen. Instead of strengthening marriage, the post-revolutionary world saw marital breakup on a scale never before witnessed. It saw cohabitation soar on a scale never seen before. Why does cohabitation matter? Because homes in which people are not married are even more likely to split up than homes in which people are married. Abortion became ubiquitous, and fatherless homes, as we know, are now the norm in many parts of the West. My point in this litany is that these trends are known to everyone, but what we really aren't looking at is that the children of these homes, the adolescents of these homes, the young adults who then grow up without a model for how to create this institution called the family themselves. And I believe that a lot of our most pressing social problems are coming from the fact that the sexual revolution has been embraced uncritically across most of the West, certainly in all of its elite precincts, and that no one is countenancing the damage out there that is now pouring into the streets. Our campuses, our streets are full of young people who have no idea what to do except to rage, and they haven't even been supplied the proper language for their rage. And so what I'm trying to do in focusing on the sexual revolution is to identify a culprit in all of this that no one wants to look at for understandable reasons. We're all affected by these trends in one way or another in our own lives, in our own families. But what if something that most of us think is value-free turns out to be the cause of what ails us? This is the paradox I keep trying to drive at.
I was recently in your country, and to reinforce what you said, there would be people who'd be angry about the things that we're now saying. Let's face it, there would be. And they'd vehemently disagree. And they'd say, look, all of this has set us free. And yet, the research is overwhelming. On loneliness, you've got an explosion in loneliness because people have fewer children later in life. They have fewer siblings, fewer aunts and uncles. Family relationships are much more stressed and broken. And the demographic numbers from around the world, you've got a bubble of countries coming through in the 20s where there's a demographic collapse, another bubble coming through in the 30s, which Australia is going to be part of, by the way, Australia, land of opportunity, where the birth rate is just absolutely in free fall. So on the one hand, the research is very clear. We have fewer people to connect with. We are much lonelier. On the other, there's a really alarming research now, really alarming, showing that young people are actually increasingly very unhappy. And going back to my earlier point, you seem driven by this unhappiness. I'm driven by this unhappiness. How does it happen in the freest, even with our current difficulties, most prosperous societies where we anticipate long lives, where our lives can be extremely interesting? We're so deeply unhappy. So we can't get away from the fact that there is a problem. And I emphasize that because there's an inclination to say that the solution to the problem is more of the same, whereas common sense would say, perhaps we ought to stop digging while we're behind.
The loneliness problem you describe is visible across the demographic spectrum now. It started out being documented among the elderly. Let's start there. Why are so many older people without people to visit them, without people who can call them by their first name? In every Western country, John, this is a mounting social problem. Again, I'm trying to get to the root cause of this. The root cause of the loneliness explosion is that inadvertently, but really, the sexual revolution subtracted people out of other people's lives. It did this by via family breakup, via the fact that people have fewer siblings, aunts, uncles, all of it. It's an arithmetic problem in one sense, root of it. And we have signs all around us that are not in social science that this is the root problem. For example, let me mention a couple of specifics. The American rapper Tupac Shakur wrote what I think is the most informative rap song ever written. It's called Papa's Song, I believe. And in it, he offers the image of a boy who has to learn to play catch by himself, who has to learn to catch a baseball by himself because his father isn't there. And so the song is all about rage against this absent father. My point is, in that example, the popular culture is telling us the same thing that some of us are trying to document with abstruse charts. Another example, straight from the headlines, we all know there have been a series of tragic shootings in the United States where teenagers have taken guns into schools and massacred people. In the latest such tragic example, the shooter left a note about why he did this. It's just happened. He said, "I have no family, I have no friends." What more stark proof do we need about what's ailing kids out there? The problem, John, is that they are being told all the wrong remedies for their situation. And so, for example, if they listen to climate change activists, young people are told, you really shouldn't have kids because it's bad for the planet. Another abstraction, in my view, which is not to say climate change isn't real, but to devise your ethical structure around something as abstract as the planet is pretty problematic, I think. Nevertheless, there are young people who are dead set on not having children because of the planet. Why is this a problem? Well, because if radical loneliness is the root cause of their woes, then telling them not to have kids is exactly the wrong kind of advice. I have a similar problem with a lot of contemporary feminism, the kind of career-first feminism that those of us who were in college in the 1980s and especially imbibed. You know, again, the idea that you should go through life as a woman and get your career all set. And later, how much later in your 30s and your 40s, start to think about children. This is the wrong idea to feed people whose problem is loneliness and disconnection. So another reason I feel for the young of the West is that I think they're being bombarded with exactly the worst messages for their situation, which is why some of us need to work harder to get the word out there. You're being told, you're being told exactly the thing that will make you more miserable.